Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
Empty wallet, full heart. Have you ever looked at a small plastic card and felt as if it was heavier than your entire future? Maybe you have worked hard, tried your best, and still wondered why life kept becoming more difficult. Maybe you have even thought about giving up, not only on your dreams, but also on learning English because your mind was simply too tired. If that feeling sounds familiar, stay with me. Today I want to tell you my true story, slowly and clearly, about the day I received food stamps in the United States, why I finally decided to use them with dignity instead of shame, and how that single decision unexpectedly changed my love story, my family, my confidence, and even the way I learned English one simple sentence at a time. My name is Emily. I live in the United States with my husband and our children. Today our life feels peaceful. We laugh during dinner. We pay our bills on time. Our children run through the house with happy voices. But life did not always look like this. Several years ago, everything felt uncertain. I remember opening my refrigerator one evening. There was a carton of milk, a few eggs, half a loaf of bread, and some vegetables that were almost too old to eat. I stood there for nearly a minute without moving. I quietly asked myself, how will we make it through this week? That question stayed inside my mind much longer than I wanted. Money had become tighter every month. Rent continued to increase. Gas cost more. Groceries became more expensive. Every dollar had a job before it even entered our bank account. My husband worked long hours. I worked whenever I could. We were not lazy. We were not irresponsible. We were simply a family trying to survive during a difficult season. Many people believe that asking for help means failure. I believe that too. Growing up, I heard people say things like, strong people solve their own problems. So every time someone mentioned food assistance, I immediately thought, that is for someone else, not me. Looking back now, I realize that pride can sometimes become heavier than poverty. One afternoon, a neighbor gently asked me whether I had considered applying for food stamps. I smiled politely and changed the subject. Inside, however, I felt embarrassed before I had even filled out a single form. That evening I searched online. I learned that many working families qualified because wages had not kept up with the cost of living. I also discovered that temporary nutrition assistance was created to help families remain healthy while they worked toward financial stability. That surprised me. I had imagined something completely different. Psychologists often explain that shame grows strongest when people believe their struggle makes them less valuable. Yet studies about self-compassion suggest that treating ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a friend reduces stress and helps us make better long-term decisions. I needed that reminder. If my closest friend could not afford groceries, would I judge her? Of course not. Then why was I judging myself so harshly? A few days later, I completed the application. My hands actually shook while filling in the information. Income, expenses, family size. Every answer felt like admitting defeat. Weeks later, an envelope arrived. Inside was approval. And then came the card. It looked ordinary. Just a plastic card. But when I held it in my hand, I felt tears forming in my eyes. Not because I was happy. Not because I was angry. Because I felt both emotions at exactly the same time. I whispered, is this really who I am now? That question stayed with me for days. Interestingly, our brains naturally compare our situation with what we believe other people think about us. Social psychologists call this perceived social judgment. The surprising part is that we usually overestimate how much other people are paying attention to our problems. Most people are thinking about their own lives, not ours. That realization slowly changed something inside me. Around the same time, I continued practicing English every day. Only a little. Very slowly. Sometimes I simply read one short sentence aloud. I can do this. I am learning. Today is enough. Those simple sentences became much more than language practice. They became quiet promises to myself. I did not know it then, but that small card would eventually teach me something much bigger than budgeting. It would teach me that accepting help with gratitude is very different from giving up. And that lesson would soon be tested in the most unexpected place imaginable. A new life in America. Long before that plastic card rested quietly inside my wallet, another challenge had already been shaping my life. It was not only about money. It was about learning how to belong in a country that often felt exciting, confusing, welcoming, and overwhelming all at the same time. Looking back now, I realized that my greatest struggle was never just speaking English. It was believing that I could build a real life in the United States while sounding imperfect every single day. When I first arrived in America, everything felt different. The streets seemed wider than I expected. People smiled at strangers. Cashiers asked, "How's your day going?" even when there was a long line behind me. At first, I thought they truly wanted a detailed answer. I would pause, search for the right words, and begin explaining my day. By the time I finished my first sentence, they were already handing me my receipt with another friendly smile. Later, I learned that many greetings in American culture are simple ways to show kindness. A short answer like, "Good, thanks. How are you?" is usually enough. That tiny lesson made daily conversations much easier. The weather surprised me too. One winter morning, I opened the front door and felt cold air hit my face like a wall. Snow covered the sidewalks, the trees, and every parked car. It looked beautiful from inside the house. Outside, it felt like my ears had disappeared. I laughed at myself while trying to walk across an icy parking lot. Every careful step looked like a beginner learning to dance. Life also moved faster than I expected. Appointments started on time. People planned weeks ahead. In America, I learned that being on time showed respect. Little by little, those differences stopped feeling strange. They simply became part of daily life. The hardest part, however, was English. I understood more than I could say. My mind often built perfect sentences. My mouth produced something completely different. At the grocery store, I once wanted to ask where the rice was located. Instead, I nervously asked an employee where I could find the white tiny stones for eating. For one long second, we both looked confused. Then she smiled. "Oh, rice." We laughed together. That moment taught me something important. Making mistakes did not end conversations. Sometimes mistakes actually started them. Researchers who study language learning have found that people remember vocabulary better when words are connected to real experiences and emotions. A funny mistake, a kind conversation, or even a small embarrassment often becomes a memory that helps the brain store new language more effectively. So instead of hiding from mistakes, I slowly began collecting them. Each mistake became another English lesson. Every morning, I created a tiny routine. I made coffee. I looked out the kitchen window. Then I read 5 simple English sentences aloud. Very slowly. Very clearly. I am making breakfast. It is cold today. My family is still sleeping. I will keep learning. I am improving every day. These were not difficult sentences, but repetition built confidence. Confidence built courage, and courage created progress. My husband noticed the change before I did. One evening he smiled and said, "You're speaking without stopping to translate every word." I hadn't even realized it. Sometimes improvement happens so quietly that we only recognize it after looking backward. Life was still financially difficult. Bills continued arriving. Some nights we carefully planned every grocery purchase before entering the store. but something inside me had changed. Instead of saying, "My English is terrible," I began saying, "My English is getting better." That single word, getting, changed everything. It reminded me that growth is a process, not a destination. I was no longer waiting to become perfect before living my life. I was living while learning. And, without realizing it, that new mindset would soon help me face one of the most emotional moments I had ever experienced, the day I finally decided to use my food stamps for the very first time. Love during hard times. People often imagine that love grows strongest during candlelight dinners, surprise vacations, or perfect weekends. My experience was completely different. The deepest parts of our marriage were built while sitting at a small kitchen table covered with unpaid bills, grocery coupons, and a calculator that seemed to produce numbers we never wanted to see. Those ordinary evenings taught us more about love than any romantic movie ever could. When my husband and I first married, we dreamed like many young couples. We talked about buying a small house. We imagined family road trips every summer. We laughed about decorating a future nursery. Those dreams were real. So were our financial struggles. Some months we reached the last week before payday with very little money left. We planned every meal carefully. We compared prices at different grocery stores. Sometimes we postponed buying something we truly needed because rent always came first. Stress quietly entered our home, not as loud arguments, as silence. I remember one evening after dinner. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. We both stared at the table, thinking about bills that were due the following week. Finally, I broke the silence. "I feel like I'm failing." My husband immediately reached across the table and held my hand. "We are struggling," he said softly. "But struggling is not the same as failing." I never forgot those words. They became one of the strongest foundations of our marriage. Money creates pressure, but pressure also reveals character. Some couples begin blaming each other. Others learn to become teammates. We chose the second path, although it was not always easy. Our communication also faced another challenge: English. Even after improving my listening skills, difficult conversations still felt exhausting. When emotions became strong, finding the right English words seemed almost impossible. One evening I wanted to explain that I was worried about our future. Instead, I said, "I think tomorrow is broken." My husband looked confused for a second. Then he smiled kindly. "You mean you're worried about the future?" I laughed through my tears. "Yes, that's exactly what I mean." Moments like that taught us patience. He never laughed at my English. He listened for my meaning instead of my grammar. That small difference made me feel safe enough to keep speaking. Researchers who study healthy relationships often find that couples who respond with empathy instead of criticism build greater trust over time. Feeling emotionally safe lowers stress and helps people communicate more openly, even when conversations are difficult. Looking back, I understand why. Every encouraging response made me a little braver. Every patient conversation made my English a little stronger. Every shared problem made our marriage a little deeper. We also created small daily habits. Every evening we spent 15 minutes talking without looking at our phones. Sometimes we discussed work. Sometimes we talked about funny things our neighbors did. Sometimes we simply practiced English together. He would ask easy questions. "What made you smile today? What was difficult today? What are you thankful for?" There were no perfect answers, only honest ones. Those simple conversations became better practice than memorizing long vocabulary lists. Language became part of real life instead of another school subject. One Saturday afternoon we visited a local park with homemade sandwiches instead of eating at a restaurant. Children were running everywhere. Families laughed together. For a moment, I compared our life with theirs. I wondered whether everyone else was happier. Then I noticed something. A father nearby was carefully fixing his daughter's broken toy. Another couple quietly discussed their monthly budget. A mother comforted her crying son after he fell. No family looked perfect up close. Everyone carried something invisible. That realization lifted a heavy weight from my heart. We were not alone. We were simply human. Slowly, I stopped measuring success by how much money we had. Instead, I measured it by different questions. Did we support each other today? Did we speak kindly? Did we keep trying? If the answer was yes, then we were moving forward. I still worried about groceries. I still worried about bills. And deep inside, I still worried about using my food stamps for the first time. The card remained safely inside my wallet untouched. I kept telling myself, maybe next week. But eventually, there would be no more waiting. Our refrigerator was becoming emptier again, and the moment I had feared for so long was finally about to arrive. The day I applied. Fear has a strange habit. It often becomes much bigger inside our imagination than it is in real life. For weeks, my food stamps card stayed hidden behind my driver's license inside my wallet. Every time I opened my wallet, I saw the corner of that card. Every time, I quietly closed it again. I kept telling myself, maybe we can manage one more week. But hope alone does not fill an empty refrigerator. One Sunday evening, my husband and I sat at the kitchen table again. We made a list. Milk, bread, rice, chicken, fresh fruit for the children, eggs, peanut butter. When we added everything together, the total was more than the money left in our checking account. Neither of us spoke. Finally, my husband looked at me gently. The card is there for families like ours. I looked down. I still feel embarrassed. He nodded. I know. Then he added something that completely changed the way I thought. If someone broke their leg, would you tell them not to use crutches? No, I answered immediately. Then why should a family refuse temporary help when they need it? His question stayed in my mind. Sometimes we accept physical help without shame, but reject financial help because we fear other people's opinions. That night, I could hardly sleep. I imagined standing in line at the grocery store. I imagined people staring at me. I imagined someone thinking we were lazy. Our brains often create stories before reality even begins. Psychologists describe this as a form of anticipatory anxiety. We predict negative outcomes without evidence, and those predictions feel surprisingly real. The good news is that those imagined situations are often much worse than what actually happens. The next morning, I decided something. I would stop arguing with my imagination. I would deal with reality instead. Reality was simple. My family needed food. The program existed to help families through difficult seasons. Using it responsibly was not cheating. It was exactly what it had been designed for. Before leaving home, I practiced a few English sentences aloud. Good morning. Thank you. Have a nice day. Simple words. But they made me feel calmer. Language can do something powerful. When we repeat positive, familiar phrases, our breathing naturally slows and our confidence often increases. Even short speaking exercises can help reduce nervousness before stressful situations. I placed the card carefully inside my wallet. This time, I did not hide it. During the drive to the grocery store, I noticed ordinary life continuing all around me. Parents walked children to school. Construction workers drank coffee before work. A mail carrier delivered letters. The world was moving normally. No one knew my private worries. No one was thinking about the card inside my wallet. That realization made me smile a little. Inside the supermarket, everything looked familiar. Fresh vegetables, bright fruit, the smell of warm bread. children asking for cereal, shopping carts rolling across the floor. I slowly pushed my cart through each aisle. For the first time in weeks, I did not have to calculate every single dollar with fear. Instead, I focused on buying healthy food. Apples instead of candy. Oatmeal instead of expensive snacks. Frozen vegetables that would last longer. I realized something unexpected. Using assistance wisely required planning. It required responsibility. It required thinking about nutrition, budgeting, and the future. There was nothing careless about it. As I continued shopping, I heard English all around me. Excuse me. Can I help you? Paper or plastic? Months earlier, those everyday conversations had frightened me. Now I understood almost all of them. Not perfectly, but well enough. That small progress gave me unexpected confidence. Learning English had not happened overnight. It had happened one conversation at a time. One mistake at a time. One patient day at a time. I took a deep breath as my shopping cart slowly rolled toward the checkout lane. This was the moment I had imagined for weeks. My heart beat faster. My hands felt cold. The cashier smiled warmly and said, "Hi. Did you find everything you needed today?" I smiled back. "Yes," I answered. My voice was quiet, but it was steady. Then I reached into my wallet and touched the card. For one brief second, I almost pulled my hand back. Instead, I made a different choice. I lifted the card with confidence. I was about to discover that the greatest battle had never been at the checkout counter. It had always been inside my own mind. No shame at checkout. The checkout line felt much longer than it really was. My shopping cart was not full. It held simple things that would help our family through the week. Fresh apples, eggs, milk, rice, vegetables, oatmeal, bread, chicken, and peanut butter. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. Just food that would become breakfasts before school, quick lunches between work, and quiet family dinners around our small kitchen table. I stood there waiting. The person in front of me paid and left. Now it was my turn. For a second, my heartbeat seemed louder than the beeping sound of the scanner. The cashier smiled. "Hello. How are you today?" I smiled back. "I'm doing well. Thank you." Those words came out naturally. Months ago, I would have worried about every sound and every grammar mistake. Now I simply spoke. She scanned each item one by one. Beep, beep, beep. Every sound made me a little more nervous. Finally, she looked up. "Your total is ready." This was the moment I had imagined hundreds of times. I slowly took out the food stamps card. My hands were steady this time. I handed it to her. She accepted it exactly the same way she accepted every other customer's payment. No surprised face.
No judgment. No uncomfortable silence.
She simply completed the transaction with professional kindness. Then she smiled again. "You're all set. Have a wonderful day." That was it. The moment I had feared for weeks lasted less than 30 seconds. As I placed the groceries into my cart, something unexpected happened. An older woman behind me quietly said, "Those apples look really good." I laughed. "I hope my kids think so too." She smiled warmly. "They probably will." That was our entire conversation. She never looked at my card. She never asked questions. She simply spoke to me like another neighbor buying groceries. Walking toward the parking lot, I suddenly realized how much energy I had wasted worrying about something that barely happened. Our minds often build giant walls out of tiny bricks. Many psychologists explain this through the spotlight effect. We naturally believe everyone notices us far more than they actually do. In reality, most people are busy thinking about their own schedules, families, work, and responsibilities. I had spent weeks imagining strangers judging me. Instead, I met ordinary kindness. That afternoon, I unloaded the groceries at home. My children smiled when they saw fresh strawberries. My husband carried the bags into the kitchen. "How did it go?" he asked gently. I paused. Then I smiled. It was normal. He smiled too. Sometimes normal is exactly the miracle we need. That evening we cooked together. The children helped wash vegetables. One child proudly stirred the soup. Another carefully placed plates on the table. Our dinner was simple, but it felt rich, not because of expensive ingredients, because nobody went to bed hungry. During dinner, I looked around the table. The room was filled with conversation, small laughter, questions about school, plans for the weekend. I suddenly understood something that had taken me months to learn. Food assistance had not taken away my dignity. It had protected my family while we continued working toward a better future. There is an important difference. Receiving temporary help is not the same as depending on hopelessness. One creates opportunity. The other accepts defeat. I had not accepted defeat. I had accepted support. That distinction changed everything. Interestingly, researchers studying resilience have found that people recover from difficult periods more successfully when they accept appropriate support instead of trying to carry every burden alone. Healthy independence does not mean refusing all help. It means using available resources wisely while continuing to move forward. That idea stayed with me. I also noticed another change. Because grocery shopping no longer filled me with fear, I could actually pay attention to the English around me. I listened to announcements over the store speakers. I read food labels carefully. I chatted briefly with cashiers. Without realizing it, every shopping trip became another English lesson. Real life became my classroom. Simple conversations became listening practice. Reading ingredient labels became reading practice. Speaking to employees became speaking practice. I no longer needed perfect conditions to learn. I simply needed the courage to keep showing up. Looking back now, that first shopping trip was never really about groceries. It was about freedom. Freedom from shame. Freedom from pretending everything was fine. Freedom to admit that difficult seasons do not last forever. And just as our confidence slowly began to grow, another beautiful chapter was quietly beginning at home. Our family was about to become stronger in ways that had nothing to do with money. English changed slowly. People sometimes ask me the secret to learning English. They expect me to mention a perfect textbook, an expensive course, or a magical method that works in 30 days. I always smile because my answer is much simpler. My English did not grow inside a classroom. It grew while I was living my ordinary life. Every small moment became a lesson, and every simple conversation became another brick in the foundation of my confidence. The grocery store became one of my favorite classrooms. Instead of rushing through the aisles, I slowed down. I picked up a box of oatmeal and quietly read the label. Whole grain. High fiber. No added sugar. Some words were familiar. Others were completely new. I never tried to memorize everything at once. I chose 1 or 2 new words during each shopping trip. That was enough. Our brains learn better when information arrives in small, meaningful pieces rather than large amounts all at once. Cognitive scientists often describe this as reducing mental overload. Learning a little every day is usually far more effective than trying to learn everything in one weekend. So, I stopped chasing perfection. I started chasing consistency. Every morning after breakfast, I read a short paragraph aloud. Not quickly. Slowly. Very slowly. I listened carefully to each sound. If I made a mistake, I simply repeated the sentence. There was no punishment.
No frustración.
Only practice. Sometimes my children sat nearby while doing their homework. Occasionally they smiled and corrected my pronunciation. At first I felt embarrassed. Then I realized something beautiful. Learning together brought our family even closer. Soon it became our little tradition. My youngest child would point at objects around the house. Window.
Chair.
Pillow. Then everyone repeated the word together. The room filled with laughter more often than perfect pronunciation.
That was perfectly fine.
Joy makes learning easier. Stress makes learning harder. Researchers have found that positive emotions improve attention and memory. When we feel relaxed and safe, the brain becomes more willing to absorb new information. That explained why I remembered words better during happy family conversations than during anxious moments alone. My husband also joined our evening practice. After dinner, we usually spent 15 or 20 minutes speaking only English. The rules were simple. Short sentences. No fear.
No interrupting.
If someone forgot a word, we helped instead of criticizing. One evening I wanted to describe our old family car. Instead of saying, "It's unreliable," I laughed and said, "Our car likes surprise vacations at the repair shop." Everyone burst into laughter. Even now, years later, we still joke about that sentence. Funny memories are powerful teachers. I also discovered something surprising while watching children learn language. They never apologize for trying. A toddler can pronounce the same word incorrectly 10 times in a row. Then they happily try an 11th time. Adults often do the opposite. We become afraid after one mistake. We become silent after 2. I decided to borrow a child's attitude instead. Mistakes were no longer proof that I was failing. They were proof that I was participating. Slowly, I noticed changes. I understood more conversations. I stopped translating every sentence inside my head. I began thinking directly in simple English. That small shift felt almost magical. One afternoon at the supermarket, an elderly man accidentally dropped several cans onto the floor. Without thinking, I quickly helped him pick them up. He smiled warmly. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." I answered naturally. "You're welcome. Have a wonderful day." Only after walking away did I realize something. I had spoken English without planning every word first. For months, that had been my dream. Now it had quietly become reality. Progress rarely announces itself with fireworks. More often, it whispers. You suddenly notice that yesterday's impossible task has become today's normal habit. Looking back, I realized that learning English had never been separate from building my life in America. Every grocery trip, every family dinner, every conversation with a neighbor, every smile from a cashier, every mistake, every success. They all became chapters in the same story. And as my confidence with English continued to grow, something even more meaningful was happening inside our home. Our family was growing, not only in language, but in love, trust, and hope for the future. Our family grew stronger. Have you ever noticed that the biggest turning points in life rarely arrive with loud music or dramatic speeches? They often begin with something so ordinary that you almost miss it. One quiet Saturday morning, while pouring cereal into 3 little bowls, I suddenly realized something that shocked me. Months earlier, I had been afraid that using food stamps would make my children feel embarrassed. Instead, it had done the exact opposite. It had protected their childhood. They never worried about empty shelves in the refrigerator. They never knew how many nights their father and I whispered about bills after they had gone to sleep. They simply laughed, argued over who got the last strawberry, and ran through the house with endless energy. In that moment, I understood something I wish someone had told me years before. Children remember love far longer than they remember money. That realization changed the way I looked at everything. every family dinner became more than a meal. It became proof that difficult seasons do not define a family. Love does. America had already taught me many lessons about culture. Neighbors smiled even if they did not know your name. Teachers encouraged children to ask questions instead of staying silent. Libraries welcomed everyone without asking how much money they earned. Community parks filled with families from every background imaginable. Different languages mixed together while children played the same games without caring where anyone came from. Watching this every weekend slowly changed my heart. Our family did not have to become exactly like everyone else. We simply had to become the best version of ourselves. At home, we created little traditions that cost almost nothing. Friday nights became homemade pizza nights. The children sprinkled cheese while laughing because it always landed everywhere except on the pizza. Sunday afternoons became reading time. We chose simple English storybooks, and each person read one page aloud. Nobody laughed when someone mispronounced a word. Instead, we smiled, corrected it together, and kept reading. Without realizing it, our living room became the most comfortable English classroom I had ever known. Researchers have found that children and adults learn language more effectively when learning is connected with positive emotions, family interaction, and repeated exposure instead of fear or pressure. Looking back, I believe that was exactly what happened inside our home. English slowly stopped feeling like homework. It became part of our family conversations. One evening, my youngest child looked at me with curious eyes and asked, "Mom, are we poor?" The question landed in complete silence. For 1 second, I felt my heart stop. I could have answered with numbers or bank accounts. Instead, I smiled gently and said, "Sometimes we have less money than we want, but we have everything we need to love each other." My child smiled, nodded, and happily returned to building a tower with colorful blocks. That simple conversation stayed with me for weeks. Children often see life much more clearly than adults. They measure happiness differently. They count hugs instead of salaries. They count bedtime stories instead of expensive vacations. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, my husband quietly sat beside me on the porch. The summer air felt warm, and fireflies blinked across the yard. "Do you remember the day you were afraid to use your food stamps card?" he asked. I laughed softly. "I remember every second." He smiled. "You know what I remember? I remember your courage." I looked at him surprised. Courage? I had never thought of myself that way. I thought courage belonged to firefighters, soldiers, and heroes in movies. He shook his head before I even spoke. "Real courage," he said quietly, "is doing what your family needs even when your pride tells you not to." Those words settled deep inside me. Psychologists often explain that resilient families share one important habit. They do not pretend life is perfect. Instead, they face challenges together, communicate honestly, and continue building routines that create emotional safety. We were accidentally doing exactly that. Our problems had not disappeared overnight. We still budgeted carefully. We still searched for grocery discounts. We still repaired things instead of replacing them whenever possible. But something inside our family had completely changed. We no longer measured ourselves by what we lacked. We measured ourselves by how faithfully we showed up for one another every single day. Looking back now, I no longer see those difficult years as the chapter where we had the least. I see them as the chapter where we built the most, more patience, more gratitude, stronger communication, deeper love, and a home where every small English conversation became another step toward a brighter future. I thought our greatest blessing was finally having enough food on the table. I was wrong. The greatest blessing was discovering that the hardest season of our lives was quietly turning our ordinary family into an unbreakable one. Small steps changed everything. What if I told you that the biggest mistake I ever made while learning English had nothing to do with grammar, pronunciation, or vocabulary? It was believing that one amazing day would suddenly transform me into a confident English speaker. I kept waiting for a breakthrough, a magical moment when every sentence would become easy. That moment never came. Instead, something much more powerful happened. Something so quiet that I almost ignored it. One ordinary Tuesday morning, while ordering coffee at a small cafe near my neighborhood, I realized I had just finished an entire conversation in English without translating a single sentence inside my head. The cashier smiled, handed me my coffee, wished me a wonderful day, and I walked outside before stopping in complete surprise. I actually turned around and looked back through the cafe window because I couldn't believe what had just happened. Months earlier, even ordering a cup of coffee had felt like an exam. Now it simply felt like life. That tiny moment became one of the greatest victories I had ever experienced because it proved that real progress is almost invisible while it is happening. Scientists who study habit formation explain that the human brain builds stronger neural pathways through small, repeated actions instead of rare, intense efforts. In simple words, your brain prefers 10 minutes every day over 5 exhausting hours once a month. When I finally understood that principle, everything changed. I stopped trying to become fluent overnight. Instead, I focused on becoming 1% better each day. Every morning, while making breakfast, I listened to slow English for 10 minutes. While folding laundry, I quietly repeated short sentences aloud. Driving to the grocery store became listening practice. Waiting in line became vocabulary review. Cooking dinner became speaking practice because I described every step in English.
I'm cutting onions.
The water is boiling. Dinner smells good. They were simple sentences, but simple sentences create confident speakers. Before long, English stopped feeling like a separate subject. It became part of my daily routine, just like brushing my teeth or making coffee. Researchers in cognitive psychology have repeatedly shown that learning attached to existing daily habits is remembered more easily because the brain enjoys predictable routines. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't only training my English. I was training my identity. I slowly stopped thinking, I'm someone trying to learn English. Instead, I became someone who simply uses English every day. That small identity shift changed my motivation forever. Around the same time, something unexpected happened at home. My children began correcting my pronunciation less often because there were fewer mistakes to correct. One afternoon, my oldest child laughed and said, "Mom, your English sounds different now." I smiled and asked, "Different how?" My child thought for a moment before answering, "You sound comfortable." That single word meant more to me than any exam score ever could. Comfortable. Not perfect. Not flawless. Comfortable. I realized that confidence sounds much louder than perfection. Even native speakers forget words, pause during conversations, and sometimes choose the wrong expression. Communication has never been about speaking perfectly. It has always been about connecting honestly. That lesson became even clearer one weekend when our family volunteered at a local community food bank. Months earlier, I had stood on the other side, quietly accepting temporary assistance for my own family. Now our financial situation had improved enough that we could spend Saturday morning helping others pack food boxes. While placing canned vegetables and pasta into bags, I met a young mother who looked exactly the way I had looked not long ago. Tired, nervous, and embarrassed. She apologized several times while asking simple questions in hesitant English. I recognized the fear in her eyes immediately because I had once carried the same fear inside myself. I smiled warmly and answered slowly, making sure every word was easy to understand. As our conversation continued, I watched her shoulders slowly relax. She smiled for the first time. In that moment, I understood something extraordinary. Kindness speaks every language fluently. Later that afternoon, while driving home with my husband, I stared quietly out the car window. America looked different than it had when I first arrived. The streets were still the same. The grocery stores were still there. The weather still surprised me every winter. But I had changed. The country no longer felt unfamiliar because I had built thousands of tiny memories inside it. Every conversation, every mistake, every family dinner, every shopping trip, every English sentence, and every difficult season had quietly become part of my new home. Psychologists often describe gratitude as one of the strongest predictors of emotional resilience because it shifts attention away from what is missing toward what is already growing. That perfectly described my life. I no longer counted everything I lacked. I noticed everything I had gained. A stronger marriage, healthier children, greater confidence, better English, deeper compassion. The woman who once hid her food stamps card in the back of her wallet had slowly disappeared. In her place stood someone who understood that accepting help with dignity and giving help with gratitude are simply two chapters of the very same
Story.
Little did I know, however, that life still had one final surprise waiting for our family, a moment that would bring every lesson together and reveal why the hardest chapter had secretly become the most beautiful part of our entire journey. Giving back changed me. What if the moment you finally stopped needing help became the moment you discovered why you had needed it in the first place? I never expected the happiest day of my financial recovery to begin with tears. It happened on a quiet afternoon when I opened my mailbox and found an official letter that looked almost identical to dozens I had received before. For a brief second, my heart raced. Old memories rushed back. The fear, the uncertainty, the sleepless nights, the empty refrigerator, and the plastic card I once hid inside my wallet because I believed it carried shame. But this letter was different. As I slowly read each line, I realized our family's income had reached the point where we no longer qualified for food stamps. I quietly folded the letter, sat down on the front porch, and smiled through tears. I wasn't crying because the assistance was ending. I was crying because it meant we had finally climbed out of one of the hardest seasons of our lives. Years earlier, I would have celebrated by pretending those difficult days had never happened. Instead, I did something completely unexpected. I thanked God for every painful chapter because each one had quietly transformed the person I had become. My husband came home that evening, and before I even handed him the letter, he noticed my smile. "Something happened," he said. I nodded. "We made it." Those 3 words filled our little kitchen with silence before either of us laughed. Not loud laughter. The kind of laughter that comes only after surviving something you once believed might break you forever. We hugged each other for a long time while our children happily played in the next room without understanding why Mom and Dad suddenly looked so emotional. Looking back now, I'm grateful they never fully understood our financial struggles. Children deserve to remember bedtime stories more than unpaid bills. They deserve family dinners more than adult worries. They deserve security, even when parents quietly carry uncertainty behind the scenes. That night we celebrated with a homemade dinner that cost far less than eating at a restaurant, yet somehow tasted better than any expensive meal I could remember. Gratitude has a strange way of making ordinary things feel extraordinary. Researchers studying positive psychology have repeatedly found that gratitude changes not only our emotions but also our attention. Instead of constantly searching for what is missing, the brain slowly learns to notice what is already present. I could feel that transformation happening inside me. I no longer saw myself as the woman who once needed assistance. I saw myself as the woman who had learned compassion because of it. A few weeks later, our family volunteered at the same community food pantry that had once helped neighbors facing difficult times. As I organized canned vegetables, cereal boxes, and bags of rice onto long tables, I noticed a young father standing quietly near the entrance. He looked uncomfortable. His eyes stayed on the floor while he waited. I recognized that expression immediately because years earlier, I had worn exactly the same face. Without thinking, I walked over with a smile and greeted him in slow, friendly English. We talked for only a few minutes. He apologized several times for asking questions, almost whispering the words, "I've never done this before." I gently smiled and answered, "Neither had I." He looked up, surprised. "Really?" I nodded. "Everyone needs help sometimes." His shoulders relaxed almost instantly. That small conversation reminded me that encouragement is often more valuable than advice. People rarely need someone to remind them that life is difficult. They need someone to remind them that difficult seasons eventually end. On the drive home, my oldest child asked an innocent question from the back seat. "Mom, why do we help people we don't know?" I smiled because children sometimes ask the deepest questions without realizing it. "Because," I answered slowly, "one day someone helped us when they didn't know us either." The car became wonderfully quiet. Even my husband smiled without saying a word. Compassion has a beautiful way of traveling from one family to another, creating stories that strangers may never fully see. Scientists who study generosity have discovered something fascinating. Helping others activates many of the same reward centers in the brain as receiving kindness ourselves. In other words, generosity strengthens both the person giving and the person receiving. I understood that truth long before I learned the science behind it. Every volunteer Saturday left me feeling lighter than when I had arrived. Every smile reminded me how far our family had traveled, not only financially, but emotionally. The woman who once believed a government assistance card defined her worth had disappeared completely. In her place stood someone who finally understood that dignity is never printed on a plastic card. Dignity lives in honesty, responsibility, perseverance, gratitude, and the courage to keep moving forward one small step at a time. As our family drove home beneath a golden American sunset, I realized our story had never really been about food stamps, money, or even learning English. It had always been about becoming the kind of people who could receive kindness without shame and return kindness without hesitation. And although I believed our journey was finally complete, life still had one last unforgettable lesson waiting for us, a lesson that would become the true ending of everything you have heard today. The card never defined me. If you have stayed with me until this moment, there is one question I want to leave in your heart before this story ends. What if the hardest chapter of your life is not trying to destroy your future? What if it is quietly preparing you for the life you have been praying for all along? I used to believe that success meant never falling, never asking for help, and never letting anyone see my struggles. Today, after everything my family has lived through in America, I believe the exact opposite. Real success is standing up one more time than life knocks you down. Real courage is protecting the people you love, even when your pride whispers that you should do everything alone. And real confidence is no longer pretending to be perfect. It is choosing to keep moving forward with honesty, gratitude, and hope. When I look around our home today, I still see the same kitchen where we once counted every dollar before buying groceries. The same dining table where unpaid bills once covered every corner now holds family board games, homework, birthday cakes, and cups of coffee shared during slow Sunday mornings. Our refrigerator is full, but that is not the greatest blessing. The greatest blessing is hearing laughter echo through every room because peace has finally replaced fear. Sometimes I quietly watch my children talking together in English, switching naturally between simple conversations and cheerful jokes. They have no idea how many evenings their parents sat together practicing basic sentences after dinner because we refuse to stop learning. They only know that English feels normal inside our home now. Looking back, I smile because every small habit mattered more than I ever imagined. Every grocery trip became a listening lesson. Every recipe became reading practice. Every conversation with a cashier became speaking practice. Every mistake became another teacher instead of another reason to quit. Researchers who study language acquisition consistently explain that meaningful repetition inside real-life situations builds stronger long-term memory than memorizing isolated vocabulary lists. I experienced that truth with my own life. I did not learn English because I chased perfection. I learned because I kept living, listening, reading, speaking, and trying again every single day. Even now, I still discover new words, new expressions, and better ways to communicate. Learning never truly ends, and that has become one of my favorite parts of life. A few months ago, something happened that brought this entire journey full circle. I returned to the same grocery store where I had once stood trembling with my food stamps card in my shaking hands. The automatic doors opened with the same familiar sound. The bright lights reflected off the polished floors exactly as they had years before. I slowly pushed my shopping cart through the produce section, smiling at memories only I could see. Then, near the checkout lanes, I recognized the cashier who had served me during my very first visit. She looked at me for a moment before smiling warmly. "I remember you," she said. I laughed in surprise. "You do?" She nodded. "You always smiled, even when you looked nervous." We both laughed together. She had no idea how much those simple words meant to me. She never knew that I had spent weeks fearing that moment. She never knew that her ordinary kindness had quietly changed the way I saw myself. Before leaving the store, I thanked her, not only for scanning groceries years ago, but for treating every customer with the same respect. She looked genuinely surprised and simply answered, "Everyone deserves kindness." I carried those 4 words with me all the way home because they perfectly summarized everything this journey had taught me. Everyone deserves kindness. The struggling family. The nervous immigrant learning English. The single parent working 2 jobs. The elderly neighbor counting coins. The child asking innocent questions. The cashier standing behind the register all day. And yes, even the person staring back at us in the mirror. Psychologists often explain that self-respect grows when our actions consistently match our deepest values. My values were never about appearing successful. They were about loving my family, working honestly, continuing to learn, accepting help with gratitude when necessary, and giving help generously whenever possible. Somewhere along the way, those values quietly built a life far richer than money alone could ever provide. If you are listening today while feeling discouraged, overwhelmed, or embarrassed by your own circumstances, I hope you remember one thing from my story. Your current chapter is not your final chapter. A temporary struggle is not a permanent identity. A government assistance card cannot measure your character. Your bank account cannot calculate your worth. Your imperfect English cannot predict your future. Keep reading. Keep listening. Keep speaking one simple sentence at a time. Keep believing that tiny improvements become extraordinary transformations when repeated consistently. One day you will look back just as I do now and realize that the chapter you once wanted to erase became the chapter that taught you courage, compassion, gratitude, resilience, and hope. My food stamps card eventually disappeared from my wallet, but the lessons it gave me will stay in my heart forever. They remind me every single day that dignity is not something we lose when we receive help. Dignity is something we strengthen every time we choose honesty over pride, kindness over judgment, perseverance over fear, and hope over despair. That is the real story I wanted to share with you today, and perhaps, without realizing it, it has become the beginning of your own story too. Before you leave, let me ask you one final question. What if the story that makes you feel ashamed today becomes the story that inspires someone else tomorrow? When I first held that food stamps card, I thought it was a symbol of failure. Today, I know it was a symbol of survival, hope, and a second chance. It never defined who I was.
My choices did.
Every small English sentence I practiced, every honest conversation with my family, every difficult day I refused to give up, those were the moments that truly shaped my future. If you're learning English right now and sometimes feel too slow, too old, too nervous, or simply not good enough, please don't stop. Remember this. Fluency isn't built in one perfect day. It's built in thousands of imperfect moments that nobody else notices. One sentence, one story, one conversation, one brave step at a time. And maybe, one day, you'll look back and realize that the chapter you wanted to erase became the chapter that changed your life forever. If this story encouraged you, helped you practice your English, or reminded you that you're not alone, please take one small action today. Click like, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and what part of this story touched your heart the most. And subscribe to join our growing community of English learners across America and around the world. Every week, I'll share new slow English stories about real life, love, family, American culture, daily conversations, and inspiring journeys designed to help you improve your English listening, English reading, English speaking, vocabulary, pronunciation, and confidence, one meaningful story at a time. Until our next story, keep listening slowly, keep speaking bravely, keep believing in yourself, and remember, your English will grow, your confidence will grow, and your story is only just beginning. That is all for today. I'll be making many more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe so you don't miss them. See you in the next video.